Are you stupid? The billionaire snapped his finger, stabbing toward a single drop of water on the white tablecloth. The restaurant went silent. Across the table, the scientist he was trying to impress stopped speaking. The waitress stood frozen, her hands still around the glass bottle. What Finch didn't notice was the small silver atom pinned to her uniform, or the way the old scientist's eyes had locked onto it. One careless insult. One woman he dismissed as insignificant. And in the next few minutes, the $3 billion deal meant to crown his empire would quietly collapse because the man across the table had just realized who she really was. The rhythmic clatter of fine china and the hushed symphony of expensive conversations were the soundtrack to Helen Vance's life. At 27, she moved through the opulent dining room of the Pinnacle with a practiced grace that belied the storm raging within her. The Pinnacle, perched atop a Manhattan skyscraper, was a universe away from her cramped two-bedroom apartment in Queens, a world where the price of a single bottle of wine could cover her rent for 3 months. Every smile she offered, every plate she placed with delicate precision, was a performance, a necessary one. Her life was a ledger of carefully balanced anxieties. On one side was the mounting pile of medical bills for her younger sister Chloe. Chloe at 16 was a brilliant artist, trapped in a body fighting a rare autoimmune disease. Her treatments were experimental, astronomically expensive, and the only hope Helen had. On the other side of the ledger was her meager income, a waitress's salary supplemented by tips that fluctuated with the whims of the city's elite. This wasn't the life Helen had been destined for. She held a master's degree in theoretical physics from MIT, an achievement that now felt like a relic from a parallel existence. Her parents, both celebrated physicists, had perished in a car accident 5 years ago, leaving Helen as Chloe's sole guardian. The promising research fellowship she'd been offered was abandoned without a second thought. The world of quantum mechanics and string theory was replaced by the immediate crushing physics of survival. The force of debt, the velocity of time running out, and the constant heavy mass of responsibility. Tonight, the restaurant was buzzing with a particular kind of energy, a frisson of power and money that was palpable even to the kitchen staff. The corner booth, the one with a panoramic view of the glittering city skyline, was reserved for Alistair Finch. The name alone was enough to make the staff tense. Finch was the CEO of Finch Dynamics, a sprawling tech conglomerate that had its tendrils in everything from aerospace to artificial intelligence. He was a titan of industry, a man whose profile in Forbes magazine described him as brutally efficient and pathologically allergic to incompetence. His reputation preceded him. He was known for his volcanic temper and a disdain for service staff that bordered on cruelty. Marcus, the restaurant's obsequious manager, had gathered the floor staff for a pre-shift briefing that felt more like a military operation. "Listen up," he'd hissed, his eyes darting nervously. "Alistair Finch is dining here tonight. He's closing a major deal with a Dr. Oris Thorne. This isn't just any dinner. This is a multi-billion-dollar negotiation happening at our table 12. Helen, you're on that section." A collective intake of breath swept through the small group. Serving Alistair Finch was like being chosen to walk a tightrope over a pit of vipers. Helen's heart sank, but her face remained a mask of calm professionalism. "Understood, Marcus." "No," Marcus said, stepping closer to her, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You don't understand. There can be 0 mistakes. Not a single water spot on a glass, not a fork out of place. Finch once had a waiter fired in London because his tie was slightly askew. He sees it as a sign of disrespect, a lack of discipline. Everything must be perfect. Perfection. It was a concept Helen understood intimately from her old life, a world of elegant equations and universal constants. Here in this world, perfection was about anticipating the unspoken demands of a man who saw her as nothing more than a functional object. As she meticulously prepared table 12, her mind drifted. She thought of Chloe, who had been too weak to get out of bed that morning. She thought of the letter from the insurance company, its cold bureaucratic language a death sentence for their hopes. They were denying coverage for the next round of treatment. That letter was folded in her pocket, its sharp edges a constant painful reminder of her desperation. She placed the last silver fork, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the charger plate. A tiny pin was fastened to the lapel of her uniform, a small silver insignia of a stylized atom, the logo of the Planck Institute for Physics. It was the last gift her father had given her, a token from a conference he'd attended. It was her one small connection to the life she'd lost, a silent rebellion against the anonymity of her apron. Most people never noticed it. To the patrons of the pinnacle, it was just a piece of meaningless flair. To Helen, it was everything. It was a reminder that she was more than a waitress. She was a mind, a scholar, a daughter of brilliance. As she looked out at the city lights, a tapestry of human ambition and struggle, she took a deep breath. It was just another night. She just had to be perfect. Alistair Finch arrived not as a man entering a restaurant, but as a conqueror surveying his territory. He was flanked by two junior executives who hovered around him like nervous satellites, their eyes fixed on him, mirroring his expressions. Finch was a man carved from sharp angles and expensive fabric. His suit was a dark, severe grey. His silver hair was impeccably styled, and his eyes, the colour of a winter sky, scanned the room with an air of bored dismissal. He didn't acknowledge the maître who greeted him, instead, striding directly towards the corner booth, as if he owned it. His executives scrambled to keep up. He slid into the booth, his movements sharp and impatient, and immediately pulled out a tablet, his thumb swiping aggressively across the screen. Helen approached the table, her posture straight, her expression neutral. "Good evening, Mr. Finch. My name is Helen, and I will be your server this evening. May I start you with some water? We have still or sparkling." Finch didn't look up from his tablet. He waved a dismissive hand. "Still. And bring the wine list. The real one, not the tourist menu." "Of course," Sir Helen said, her voice even. She returned moments later with chilled still water and the heavy leather-bound wine tome. As she poured the water, her movements were fluid and economical, a dance she had perfected over thousands of shifts. Her focus was absolute, her world narrowed to the glass, the bottle, and the precise angle of the pour. Just then, the other guest arrived. Dr. Aris Thorne was the complete antithesis of Alistair Finch. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a wild mane of white hair that seemed to defy gravity and kind, perceptive eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses. He wore a simple tweed jacket that looked comfortable and lived in a stark contrast to Finch's corporate armour. He moved with a quiet, unhurried air, his gaze taking in the restaurant with genuine curiosity rather than disdain. "Aris, you made it." Finch boomed, finally looking up from his tablet, a predatory smile stretching his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. He stood, extending a hand. Alistair Dr. Thorne said, his voice soft but resonant. He shook Finch's hand briefly. "The view is quite something. Only the best for the future of quantum computing," Finch declared, gesturing for Thorne to sit. "Only the best." As Dr. Thorne settled into the booth, Helen approached again to pour his water. She was acutely aware of both men now. Finch, who radiated an aura of oppressive, impatient energy, and Dr. Thorne, who seemed to be observing everything, including her. The incident, when it happened, was infinitesimal. A microscopic, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand, caused by a sudden sharp memory of the insurance company's letter in her pocket. A single tiny drop of water escaped the lip of the bottle and landed silently on the pristine white tablecloth. A minuscule dark pearl on a sea of white. It was nothing less than nothing. A speck. But Alistair Finch saw it. His eyes, which had ignored her very existence moments before, now locked onto the tiny droplet with laser-like intensity. The jovial mask he had worn for Dr. Thorne vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. The air grew thick and cold. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the restaurant's murmur like a shard of ice. "What is this?" He hissed, his finger jabbing towards the drop of water. Helen froze. "I do apologize, sir." It was a small what? Finch interrupted, his voice rising in volume, turning heads at nearby tables. A small mistake, a small display of incompetence. Do you know what this meeting is about? Helen's training kicked in? De-escalate. Apologize. So my deepest apologies. I will have the cloth replaced immediately. Don't bother, Finch sneered, pushing his chair back slightly. He looked at her, truly, looked at her for the first time, and his eyes were filled with a chilling contempt. He wasn't just angry. He was offended by her very presence, by her imperfection. He turned to Dr. Thorne, a smug, cruel smile on his face. You see, Arse, this is the problem with the world today. A complete lack of standards. People are given simple tasks, pour a glass of water, and they can't even do that without screwing it up. He then turned his venomous gaze back to Helen. Her heart was pounding against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She could feel the stares of the other diners. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over her. What is wrong with you, Finch? Spat now a low growl. Are you stupid? Is that it? Is your brain so small that the complex physics of gravity and liquid dynamics are beyond your grasp? The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Stupid. It struck Helen harder than a physical blow. It was an attack on the very core of who she was, on the memory of her parents, on the life she had been forced to leave behind. All the years of study, the passion for knowledge, the complex equations she could solve in her head, all of it was reduced to nothing by this arrogant, cruel man over a drop of water. Before she could even formulate a response, Finch bellowed for the manager. "Marcus, get over here!" Marcus scurried to the table, his face pale with terror. "Mr. Finch, is everything all right?" "No, everything is not all right," Finch said, pointing a finger at Helen. "This employee of yours is an incompetent idiot. She is a distraction. I want her gone. Fire her now." The demand was absolute. Marcus looked from Finch's furious face to Helen's stunned pale one. There was no choice in his eyes, only the cold calculus of profit and loss. Appeasing Alice Dister Finch was paramount. "Of course, Mr. Finch." Right away, Marcus said, not even looking at Helen. He turned to her, his expression a mixture of fear and annoyance. "Vance, you're done. Get your things and leave now." Throughout the entire exchange, Dr. Oris Thorne had remained silent, his hands resting on the table. He hadn't said a word. He just watched. He watched Finch's vicious tirade. He watched Helen's quiet, crumbling dignity, and his eyes behind the thick-rimmed glasses were unreadable. But he was watching everything. Humiliation was a physical sensation. It was a heat that spread across Helen's cheeks, a cold knot that twisted in her stomach, and a roaring in her ears that drowned out the hushed whispers of the other patrons. She stood frozen for a heartbeat, the world tilting on its axis. Fired. Just like that, over a drop of water and a single hateful word. Go! Marcus hissed, his eyes pleading with her to disappear before Finch's wrath intensified. Helen's training, her ingrained professionalism, was the only thing that kept her from shattering. She gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. She didn't look at Alistus de Finch. She couldn't. Instead, her eyes briefly met those of Dr. Thorne. In his gaze she saw not pity, but something else. A flicker of intense analytical curiosity. It was a look she recognized, the look of a scientist observing an unexpected variable. Then it was gone. She turned and walked away from the table, each step an exercise in control. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her back, a physical pressure of judgment and fleeting sympathy. Her path to the staff locker room felt like miles. The familiar sounds of the restaurant had become distorted. The clinking of glasses like mocking laughter, the low hum of conversation, a litany of her failure. In the cramped, sterile locker room, the facade finally cracked. She leaned against the cool metal of her locker, her legs trembling. The word stupid echoed in her mind, a venomous ricocheting bullet. It wasn't just the insult. It was the injustice. It was the absolute power Alistus de Finch wielded, the power to shatter someone's livelihood on a whim, to dismiss a human being as if they were a faulty piece of equipment. Her thoughts immediately flew to Chloe. This job, as demeaning as it often felt, was their lifeline. It was the only thing standing between them and eviction, the only way she could afford the co-pays on Chloe's medication. Without it, they were adrift. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at her throat. The letter from the insurance company felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. The denial combined with her termination was a death blow. She packed her small bag with numb fingers, pulling out her worn-out sneakers and her threadbare coat. As she unpinned the small silver atom from her uniform, her fingers traced its familiar shape. It felt like a mockery, now a symbol of a world of intellect and reason that had no place here. She was just a stupid waitress who couldn't pour water correctly. Meanwhile, back at table 12, a chilling silence had descended. Alistair Finch, seemingly satisfied with the execution, leaned back in his seat. A smug sense of order restored on his face. He picked up the wine list as if nothing had happened. Now he said, his tone brisk and cheerful. "Where were we? I recommend the Chateau Margaux, a vintage as bold and uncompromising as our new venture." He looked expectantly at Dr. Thorne, but the elderly scientist was not looking at the wine list. He was staring at the spot where Helen had stood, his expression thoughtful and distant. "That was unnecessary," Alistair Dr. Thorne said quietly, his voice carrying a new, harder edge. Finch scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Nonsense. It's about standards, Aris. Discipline. The little things matter. If someone can't handle the little things, they can't be trusted with the big things. It's a simple principle. That girl was a weak link. I did the establishment a favor. He saw the world in terms of links, assets, and liabilities. People were merely components in a machine, and Helen was a faulty part now discarded." Dr. Thorne slowly shook his head, his gaze finally shifting to meet Finch's. "She is a person, not a link in your supply chain. You humiliated her and destroyed her livelihood for your own satisfaction." Alistair laughed, a short barking sound devoid of humor. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. She's a waitress. She'll find another job pouring coffee somewhere. This is the real world, Aris. Sentimentality is a liability. Now about the quantum encryption algorithm." He tapped his tablet, bringing up a complex series of diagrams and equations. "My team has projected a 400% market capture within 3 years. The initial public offering for this joint venture will be the largest in tech history. We're talking about a legacy, Aris, a $3 billion valuation right out of the gate." He launched into his pitch, his voice filled with the slick, practiced passion of a man who could sell sand in the desert. He spoke of synergy, of disruption, of market dominance. The words flowed, a torrent of corporate jargon designed to impress and overwhelm. But Dr. Thorne wasn't looking at the glowing screen of the tablet. His eyes were fixed on the tiny dark spot on the tablecloth, the single drop of water that had started it all. He listened to Finch's speech, but he was hearing something else entirely. The echo of that one ugly word and the deafening silence that had followed. The entire foundation of their monumental deal had just been shaken, and Alistair Finch, in his blinding arrogance, was completely oblivious. He was pitching to a man who was no longer in the room. As Alistair Finch continued his impassioned monologue on market penetration and scalable architecture, Dr. Aris Thorne's mind was elsewhere. He was a man who had built his life on observing the details others missed. In the world of quantum physics, the tiniest, most seemingly insignificant particle could alter the outcome of an entire system. It was a principle he applied not just to science, but to people. His attention kept drifting back to the waitress Helen. There was a dissonance he couldn't shake. Her posture, even when she was being berated, wasn't one of simple servitude. It was one of immense, coiled control. It was the posture of someone accustomed to holding immense pressure within themselves without showing it. He had seen it before in brilliant graduate students grappling with impossible problems and in seasoned researchers on the verge of a breakthrough. Then there was the pin. While Finch had been dissecting her incompetence, Thorne's eyes had been drawn to the small silver atom on her lapel. It wasn't the cheap generic flair the restaurant would provide. It was specific. He recognized the stylized design. It was the insignia of the Planck Institute, one of the world's most prestigious centers for theoretical physics. It was a place he knew well. He had guest lectured there years ago. It was a symbol of the highest echelon of scientific inquiry. Why would a waitress in New York be wearing the pin of an elite German physics institute? It was a stray data point, an anomaly in the equation of the evening. And for Aris Thorne, anomalies were not to be dismissed. They were to be investigated. Alastair Thorne interrupted his voice, cutting cleanly through Finch's stream of corporate buzzwords. Finch stopped, visibly annoyed at having his momentum broken. Yes, Aris getting to the good part. Thorne ignored him. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady and intense. Tell me something. What do you believe is the most important quality in a partner? Finch was taken aback by the abrupt change in topic. A partner vision, a killer instinct, a shared goal of absolute market dominance. He rattled off the answers as if reading from a textbook on corporate rating. Interesting. Thorne said, his voice level. I would have said integrity and humility. Finch let out a short, derisive laugh. Humility, Oris, humility doesn't build empires. It builds non-profits that fold in 6 months. We're not here to be humble. We're here to conquer. My vision, your technology, we will be unstoppable. My technology, Thorne repeated softly, is not a weapon for conquest. Allister, it's a tool for understanding. The quantum entanglement core. It's based on principles of interconnectedness, on the idea that two seemingly separate particles are in fact intrinsically linked no matter the distance between them. That what happens to one instantaneously affects the other. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. I believe the same is true of people. Character is an entangled state. A person's cruelty in one area is linked to their untrustworthiness in another. It's all part of the same system. Alastair Finch's face began to harden, the plastic smile melting away, to reveal the cold irritation beneath. What are you getting at, Iris? This is a business meeting, not a philosophy seminar. Are we going to talk about the deal or not? We are talking about the deal, Thorne corrected him gently. We are talking about its very foundation. You see, this venture requires more than just your capital and your infrastructure. It requires a shared ethos. It requires a partner I can trust to steward this technology with wisdom and care, not just for profit, but for its potential impact on humanity. Thorne gestured vaguely towards the restaurant entrance where Helen had disappeared. You just showed me your character, Allister. You showed me how you treat someone you perceive to have no power, no value. You weren't just correcting a mistake. You enjoyed it. You savored her humiliation. Finch's face was now a mask of thunderous disbelief. This is about the waitress. You're seriously lecturing me about a waitress. Are you insane? I'm a scientist, Thorne replied calmly. I observe, I gather data, and I draw conclusions. And the data you've provided is troubling. So, I have to ask myself, if you treat a person with such casual cruelty over something so trivial, how would you behave when the stakes are in the billions? When a rival company emerges, when a difficult ethical decision has to be made, you've shown me that you see people as disposable as stupid. The word thrown back at him made Alastair flinch. For the first time that evening, he looked genuinely unsettled. The ground beneath his feet, which he had always assumed was solid rock, was starting to feel like sand. He had come here to close a deal to seal his legacy. He had never imagined his own behaviour was the variable being measured. Alastair Finch stared at Dr. Thorne, his mind struggling to process the turn of events. He had navigated hostile takeovers, faced down federal regulators, and crushed competitors without breaking a sweat. Yet here he was, being psychoanalyzed by a soft-spoken scientist over a fired waitress. It was absurd. It was infuriating. This is a ridiculous shakedown. Aris Finch snapped his voice tight with controlled rage. If you want a bigger percentage, just say so. Don't hide behind this moralistic theatre. This is not theatre. Dr. Thorne said, his voice losing its gentleness and taking on the weight of profound disappointment. This is a character assessment, and you, Allister, have failed spectacularly. He reached into the inner pocket of his tweed jacket and pulled out a simple black fountain pen. He laid it on the table parallel to the silverware. This pen belonged to a man named Dr. Robert Vance, a brilliant physicist. His work on quantum chromodynamics was revolutionary. He was a colleague. More than that, he was a friend. Finch stared at the pen, then back at Thorne. His expression a mixture of confusion and impatience. "I'm sorry for your friend. What does this have to do with anything Robert and his wife Doctor?" Alina Vance, a particle physicist of equal brilliance, died in a car crash about 5 years ago. Thorne continued, his eyes distant with memory. They left behind 2 daughters. The older one, she was, their protege, a mind so sharp, so intuitive, she was accepted into MIT's physics program at 16. Her dissertation on inflationary cosmology was so advanced, some of her professors admitted they had trouble following it. She was destined for greatness, a Nobel Prize perhaps. She was the future of the field. Alistair shifted uncomfortably. He hated personal stories, especially in the middle of a negotiation. They were inefficient, irrelevant data points, a tragic story. But I failed to see the relevance to our $3 billion venture. To draw Thorne's gaze sharpened, and he looked directly at Finch, his eyes cold with judgment. "Her name is Helen. Helen Vance." The name landed on the table with the force of a physical object. Alistair Finch's mind raced, connecting the dots with the terrifying speed of a man realizing he has just walked off a cliff. The waitress, Vance the story. It couldn't be the pin on her uniform. "Thorne," said his voice barely a whisper. "The Planck Institute insignia. Robert showed it to me after he brought it back from a conference in Berlin. He was so proud he was going to give it to his daughter Helen when she defended her thesis." The colour drained from Alistair's face. The entire situation had been recontextualized into a nightmare. He hadn't just insulted a random waitress. He had called one of the brightest minds of her generation, the daughter of his potential partner's late brilliant friends, stupid. He had done it publicly, viciously, and with relish. She's a waitress." Finch stammered the words, feeling weak and foolish even as he said them. "Yes," Thorne affirmed, a deep sadness in his voice. "Because when her parents died, she gave up her fellowship, her career, her entire future to come home and take care of her younger sister Chloe, who is gravely ill. She traded a laboratory at Caltech for this restaurant so she could pay for her sister's medical treatments. She carries the weight of a world on her shoulders, and she does it with a quiet dignity that you, in all your wealth and power, could never comprehend." Thorne leaned back, the story told. He looked at Finch, a man who built his identity on seeing every angle, on knowing every variable, and saw only a hollow shell. "You didn't just fail to see a person, Alistair. You failed to see brilliance hiding in plain sight. You are so blinded by your own perceived superiority that you are, in fact, the most ignorant man in this room." The accusation was devastating, a precise intellectual demolition of Alistair Finch's entire self-image. He, the master of the universe, the man who saw all the angles, had made the most colossal, idiotic blunder of his life. And he had done it in front of the one man he needed to impress above all others. The silence that followed Dr. Thorne's revelation was heavier and more profound than any sound. For Alistair Finch, it was the silence of a collapsing universe. Every certainty he had built his life upon, his infallibility, his superior judgment, his right to wield power, was turning to dust. He looked at Dr. Thorne, hoping to see a crack, a sign that this was some elaborate test he could still pass. He saw none. There was only the calm, unwavering finality of a scientist who has confirmed his hypothesis. Finch's mind, a machine geared for damage control, kicked into overdrive. I had no idea. It was a misunderstanding, a mistake. I was under pressure. I can fix this. I'll apologize. I'll hire her back. Give her a raise, a promotion. I'll donate to her sister's medical fund. Whatever it takes." The words tumbled out, a frantic, desperate cascade of solutions. Dr. Thorne slowly shook his head, a gesture that was both pitying and absolute. "You still don't understand, do you? This isn't something you can fix by throwing money at it. This isn't a negotiation. It's a conclusion. He stood up from the table, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked down at Alistair, not with anger, but with a clinical sort of finality. The core of my work, the technology you want to buy, is a quantum AI. It learns, it evolves. Its primary function is to identify and solve problems by seeing the interconnectedness of all data, no matter how small. It requires a steward who understands that principle. You, Alistair, are incapable of seeing it. You discard data you deem unimportant. You dismiss people you deem insignificant. You would be a danger to this technology. You would inevitably misuse it because your fundamental worldview is flawed. Dr. Thorne picked up his old fountain pen from the table and slipped it back into his pocket. The partnership between Finch Dynamics and the Thorne Institute is officially off the table. The deal is dead. The words were spoken without ceremony, without anger. They were a simple statement of fact. Alistair Finch felt the blood drain from his head. $3 billion years of planning the cornerstone of his legacy. Gone. You're throwing this all away over a waitress. He choked out the words, laced with disbelief. No. Dr. Thorne corrected him, his voice echoing in the now silent restaurant as nearby diners shamelessly eavesdropped. I am not throwing this away over a waitress. I am saving it from a tyrant. He turned to the two junior executives who had been sitting frozen in horror throughout the entire exchange. A piece of advice for you, gentlemen. Choose carefully who you follow. True power is not the ability to crush those beneath you. It's the ability to lift them up. With that, Dr. Thorne turned and walked away from the table, leaving Alistair Finch sitting alone amidst the wreckage of his ambition. The half-poured glasses of water, the untouched wine list, the glowing tablet displaying his now worthless projections, they were all artifacts of a future that had just been erased. Finch stared at the single dark spot on the tablecloth, the tiny, insignificant drop of water. He had built an empire worth billions, but it was all brought down by that one drop and the single ugly word it had provoked. Stupid. It was the most expensive word in history. A $3 billion word, and he was the one who had said it. The irony was so immense, so crushing, it felt like the entire skyscraper was pressing down on him. He had never felt so utterly irrevocably foolish in his entire life. Helen stood at the bus stop, the chilly night air biting at her cheeks. The city's relentless energy, which usually felt vibrant, now seemed abrasive and mocking. She clutched her small bag, the reality of her situation sinking in like a cold stone. How would she face Chloe? How could she possibly explain that she had lost their only source of income because a powerful man had decided to obliterate her for his own amusement? The insurance letter in her pocket felt heavier than ever. Despair, a feeling she had fought off for 5 long years, was beginning to creep in at the edges of her resolve. She was a physicist who understood the laws of the universe, but she had no formula to solve for hope. A sleek black town car pulled up silently to the curb in front of her. Helen ignored it, assuming it was for some wealthy resident of the nearby towers, but the back door opened and a familiar voice called out her name. Ms. Vance. She turned startled to see Dr. Aris Thorne leaning out of the car. His expression was kind, his eyes holding a warmth that hadn't been there in the restaurant. Dr. Thorne, she said, her voice barely a whisper, her mind racing. Was he here to scold her further to ensure she understood the gravity of her mistake? Please, he said, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. Allow me to give you a ride. It's cold out here. Hesitantly, not knowing what else to do, she slid into the plush leather interior of the car. It was warm and quiet, a sanctuary from the noise of the city and her own chaotic thoughts. I want to apologize, Dr. Thorne began as the car pulled smoothly into traffic for what happened back there. No one should ever be treated that way. Alistair Finch's behavior was inexcusable. Helen looked down at her hands, twisting the strap of her bag. Thank you, sir, but you have nothing to apologize for. I disagree, he said. I was his guest. I was part of the situation, and I should have intervened sooner. He paused, then turned to her, his gaze direct and serious. I knew your parents, Helen, Robert, and Lena. I admired them greatly. They were brilliant, but more than that, they were good, humble people. They saw the universe as a source of wonder, not as something to be conquered. Helen's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. You knew them, I did. I was devastated when I heard about the accident, he said softly. I tried to find out what had become of you and your sister, but you seemed to have vanished from the academic world. He glanced at the silver atom pin she had since refastened to a simple coat until I saw that pin tonight. And I saw your mother's eyes and your father's quiet intensity. And I knew tears welled in Helen's eyes. Tears she had refused to shed in the restaurant. To be seen, truly seen for who she was after so long. It was overwhelming. I had to give it all up. She whispered, the story pouring out of her. For Chloe. Her illness, the treatments, I know, he said gently. And the sacrifice you have made is more profound than any scientific theorem. But the world cannot afford to lose a mind like yours, Helen. Your parents' legacy and your own is too important. The car slowed to a stop, not in front of her modest apartment building in Queens, but before a gleaming modern building with the words, The Thorne Institute, etched in subtle lettering above the glass doors. I didn't get a chance to read your dissertation, Dr. Thorne said, a small smile playing on his lips. But I heard it was remarkable. The Institute has a new division focusing on cosmological modeling and quantum AI. It's theoretical, challenging work. It requires a mind that can see the big picture, the interconnectedness of things. He turned to her, his expression full of earnest purpose. I'm not offering you a job, Miss Vance. I'm asking you to come back to your life's work. I want you to lead the new research team. We'll provide a salary that will more than cover your needs. And our corporate health plan is one of the best in the world. Chloe will get the best care. I will personally see to it. No more insurance denials. No more compromises. Helen was speechless. It was an impossible offer, a dream she had long since buried. To return to the world of physics, to use her mind again, to have the crushing weight of Chloe's health lifted from her. It was too much to comprehend why she finally managed to ask, Why would you do all this for me? Dr. Thorne looked out the window at the institute that bore his name. Because Helen Brilliance should be nurtured, not humiliated. Because integrity matters. And because your father once told me that the most elegant equation is worthless if you forget the humanity behind it. Alistair Finch forgot. I have no intention of making the same mistake. He extended his hand. What do you say, Helen? Are you ready to help us solve some of the universe's biggest problems instead of just serving wine to its smallest men? For the first time in 5 years, Helen felt the fog of despair begin to lift, replaced by the bright, clear light of possibility. She looked at the man who had seen her when she was invisible, and she took his hand. It wasn't just a handshake. It was the closing of one equation, and the beginning of a new, infinitely more hopeful one. The fallout from that night at the Pinnacle was swift and brutal. News in the high-stakes world of tech and finance travels at the speed of light, and the story of the failed Finch deal became an industry legend overnight. The official press release was bland, and corporate citing irreconcilable differences in strategic vision. But the truth, as it always does, seeped out in whispers through executive assistants, scorned junior partners, and the staff at the restaurant. The story was simply too good, too deliciously ironic to remain secret. The tale of the Titan CEO, brought low by his own arrogance towards a waitress, spread like wildfire. Alistair Finch became a cautionary tale, a punchline in boardrooms across the globe. Finch Dynamics stock plummeted by over 30% in the week following the announcement. The $3 billion valuation of the joint venture had been baked into their future earnings projections. Its sudden disappearance created a black hole in their balance sheet. Shareholders panicked. The board of directors, once cowed by Finch's tyrannical rule, was now openly mutinous. They saw his actions not as a display of strength, but as a catastrophic liability. His judgment, once considered his greatest asset, was now seen as his fatal flaw. 2 months after that fateful dinner, Alistair Finch was forced to resign as CEO of the company he had built. His golden parachute was substantial, but it was cold comfort. He had lost the one thing he truly valued: his empire and the fear-based respect it commanded. He retreated to his sprawling empty mansion, a king deposed, left with nothing but his wealth and the bitter echoing memory of his own voice calling a brilliant woman stupid. He had won a meaningless momentary battle, and in doing so had lost the war for his own legacy. Marcus, the manager of the Pinnacle, was fired a week after the incident. The restaurant's owners, horrified at the loss of Dr. Thorne as a patron, and the public relations nightmare, made him the scapegoat. In the world of high-end service, failing to manage a situation of that magnitude was an unforgivable sin. For Helen, life transformed so completely, it felt like stepping into a different dimension. She moved with Chloe into a beautiful, spacious apartment near the Thorne Institute, with a room full of north-facing windows for Chloe's art. With the full support of the Institute's medical plan, Chloe was admitted to a top-tier treatment program, and for the first time in years, her prognosis was optimistic. The color returned to her cheeks, and the light returned to her eyes. Helen, meanwhile, thrived. Walking into the Thorne Institute every day felt like coming home. Surrounded by whiteboards filled with complex equations, the hum of supercomputers, and the passionate debates of fellow scientists, the part of her she thought was dead came roaring back to life. Her mind, once consumed with calculating tips and juggling bills, was now free to soar to the edges of the cosmos. She wasn't just a team member. She was a leader. Her unique perspective, forged in the crucible of real-world struggle, gave her an insight that her peers, who had spent their entire lives in the ivory tower of academia, lacked. She was patient, empathetic, and she understood the human element behind the data. She remembered what Dr. Thorne had told her. An equation is worthless if you forget the humanity behind it. 6 months into her new role, she published her first paper under the Thorne Institute's banner. It was a groundbreaking piece on the role of quantum entanglement in the formation of galactic structures. It caused a major stir in the scientific community. Reading her name in the prestigious journal Symmetry, Helen felt a sense of peace she hadn't known since her parents were alive. One evening, she stood with Dr. Thorne on the Institute's observatory deck, looking up at the star-dusted sky. "They would be so proud of you," Helen Arris said quietly. Helen smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile. "I think for the first time in a long time, I'm proud of myself." She had learned that the universe operates on its own form of justice. It wasn't always immediate or obvious, but arrogance was an unstable element destined to decay. And kindness, humility, and brilliance, no matter how deeply hidden or suppressed, were, like gravity, a fundamental force, patiently waiting to bend the world back into its rightful shape. The final calculation of her life was no longer about survival. It was about discovery, about hope, and about reaching for the very stars she had once only served under. 5 years is both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. In that time, Dr. Helen Vance had not just returned to the world of physics. She had reshaped a corner of it. Her work at the Thorne Institute, leading the cosmological modeling division, had produced 2 Nobel papers. Her team's predictive models on dark energy were now the industry standard. She was no longer just the daughter of brilliant physicists. She was a luminary in her own right, her name spoken with the same reverence as her parents. Tonight was a celebration of that legacy. The Thorne Institute was holding its annual fundraising gala, a glittering affair attended by the brightest minds in science and the most generous patrons of discovery. Helen, as the evening's keynote speaker, moved through the crowd with an easy, confident grace. The uniform was gone, replaced by an elegant deep blue gown that mirrored the nebulae projected on the ballroom's ceiling. Chloe, now a vibrant and healthy young woman of 21, stood beside her. Her autoimmune disease was in full remission, a miracle of the cutting-edge medicine the Institute's insurance had provided. She had become a celebrated artist, and several of her large Cosmos-inspired canvases adorned the walls of the event space, silent, swirling testaments to the sisters' journey. Dr. Thorne, his hair as wild as ever, but his eyes, filled with paternal pride, was never far from their side. As Helen was concluding a conversation with a senator about funding for STEM education, she felt a subtle shift in the room's energy. A familiar, yet somehow different figure stood near the entrance, half hidden by a marble column. He was older, greyer, and the sharp predatory arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a quiet, almost hesitant stillness. He wore a simple, well-tailored suit, but it lacked the aura of absolute power his clothes once projected. It was Alistair Finch. Helen's heart gave a single hard thump against her ribs, an involuntary echo of a past trauma. Chloe noticed her sister's change in demeanor and followed her gaze. Her expression hardened. "What is he doing here?" she whispered, her voice laced with protective anger. Dr. Thorne saw him too, his brow furrowing. "I'll have security remove him." "No," Helen said, her voice calm and steady. She placed a reassuring hand on her sister's arm. "It's all right. Let me handle this." She excused herself and began to walk toward him. It felt like crossing a bridge through time. With each step, she felt less like the celebrated Dr. Vance and more like the waitress from the pinnacle. But the feeling no longer held power over her. She was not walking toward an enemy, but toward a ghost. As she approached, Alistair saw her and visibly straightened, a flicker of his old defensive pride surfacing before being replaced by something else. Resignation. "Dr. Vance," he said, his voice softer and raspier than she remembered. "I didn't intend to intrude. I was leaving." "Mr. Finch," she replied, her tone neutral, professional. "I was surprised to see you here." He gave a wry, humorless smile. "I make an anonymous donation every year. It's a penance of a sort. I never attend. Tonight, I just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. To see you. You are everything they say you are." The compliment was delivered without artifice. It was a simple statement of fact. They stood in an awkward silence for a moment, the chattering of the gala a world away. "I know that an apology is a worthless currency for what I did." He began, his eyes finally meeting hers. They were no longer the eyes of a predator, but of a man who had spent 5 years staring into an abyss of his own making. "But I have to offer one anyway. What I said to you that night, the way I behaved, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a rot inside of me, a belief that my success gave me the right to be cruel. I was wrong, utterly, fundamentally, and ruinously wrong." He took a shallow breath. "Losing my company, my reputation. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to be quiet, to listen, to see people for the first time, to see myself. And I was horrified by the man I saw." Helen listened, her expression unreadable. She thought of the years of struggle, the constant fear, the weight that had nearly crushed her. She could have unleashed a torrent of righteous anger, recited a litany of his sins. But looking at the broken man before her, she felt only a quiet, profound sense of release. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Finch," she said, and the sincerity in her voice surprised them both. "What you did was unforgivable. But in a strange way, your cruelty was also a catalyst. Your actions set in motion the events that brought me here. They led Dr. Thorne to me. They brought me back to the life I was supposed to live. They saved my sister." She glanced over at Chloe, who was now laughing with Dr. Thorne, vibrant and full of life. "You tried to destroy my world that night." Helen continued, turning back to him. "And all you did was give me the universe back. I can't hate you for that. I can only move forward." Alistair Finch looked as though a physical weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He nodded slowly, a deep, painful understanding in his eyes. "Then I am glad my greatest failure could be your greatest victory," he said. "Good evening, Doctor." With a final respectful nod, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night, no longer a titan, but just a man. Helen watched him go, then took a deep breath. The last ghost of her past finally exorcised. She returned to her sister, and her mentor, the warmth and light of the gala, embracing her. She had faced her tormentor not with vengeance, but with the unassailable truth of her own success and grace. The final calculation had been made, and the result was peace. The story of Helen Vance and Alistair Finch serves as a powerful, visceral reminder that a person's worth is never defined by their job title or their bank account. It's measured by their character, their integrity, and the grace with which they treat others, especially those they believe to be beneath them. Alistair Finch, blinded by arrogance, saw a stupid waitress and lost an empire. Dr. Arist Thorne, guided by wisdom, saw a brilliant mind in hiding and changed a life. This incredible turn of events underscores a timeless truth. Pride is the most expensive commodity in the world, while humility and respect are truly priceless. Every person we meet is fighting a battle we know nothing about. And hidden within them may be a universe of untapped potential. If this story moved you and reminded you of the quiet strength that exists all around us, please take a moment to hit the like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories that explore the profound consequences of our choices and the power of the human spirit. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.